On March 17, 1943, at 1:30 in the afternoon, Katarzyna Nowak walked through the streets of occupied Warsaw, carrying a leather handbag and a bundle of clean laundry. She was 24 years old, dressed in a modest gray coat and dark skirt, her blonde hair pinned back in a simple style. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what her forged papers claimed she was, a laundry delivery worker making her rounds. The German soldiers at the checkpoint ahead saw her approaching and barely paid attention. Just another Polish girl. Just another civilian going about her business in the occupied city. They had no idea that the handbag she carried contained a homemade explosive device powerful enough to kill everyone in the room. They had no idea that in 4 hours, 22 of their fellow soldiers would be dead because of what she was carrying. And they had no idea that their dismissal of her as just a woman with a purse was about to become a fatal mistake. Kasia reached the checkpoint. 2 German soldiers stood at the entrance to the requisition apartment building that now served as military barracks. One of them held up his hand. "Halt! Papers!" Kasia stopped, set down the laundry bundle, and pulled her identification papers from her coat pocket. The soldier examined them, his face showing the bored contempt that German occupiers reserve for Polish civilians. "Laundry worker, what's your business here?" Kasia kept her voice steady, subservient, exactly what they expected from a Polish woman. "Delivering clean laundry, sir, for the officers' quarters." The soldier handed back her papers. "Open your bag." This was the moment. This was where everything could end. Kasia opened her leather handbag and held it out for inspection. Inside, clearly visible, were the items any young woman might carry: a compact mirror, a tube of lipstick, a white handkerchief, a small book, a comb. The soldier glanced at the contents, saw women's cosmetics and personal items, and his expression showed exactly what he thought of them. Trivial, unimportant, beneath his notice. He didn't search deeper. He didn't check for a false bottom. He didn't realize that beneath that layer of ordinary items, hidden in a concealed compartment, was a metal case containing potassium chlorate mixed with sugar, a glass vial of sulfuric acid suspended by a thin copper wire, and a chemical timer that was already counting down. He saw a lipstick in a mirror, and he stopped looking. "Go ahead. Deliver your laundry and leave quickly. Don't waste our time." Kasia closed her handbag, picked up the laundry bundle, and walked past the checkpoint into the building. She was carrying an armed explosive device, and they'd wave her through because she was just a woman with a purse. Katarzyna Nowak was born on June 3, 1918, in Warsaw, Poland. Her father, Tomasz, owned a pharmacy in the city center, a small shop that had been in the family for 2 generations. Her mother, Anna, was a schoolteacher who taught literature and history at a local gymnasium. Kasia grew up surrounded by books and science, by her mother's love of poetry and her father's fascination with chemistry. She was a bright child, curious about how things worked, always asking questions. When she was 12, her father let her help in the pharmacy, measuring compounds, mixing preparations, learning the basics of chemistry. She loved it, the precision, the reactions, the way different substances combine to create something new. In 1936, at age 18, she enrolled at Warsaw University to study chemistry. She wanted to be a researcher, maybe a professor, wanted to spend her life understanding the molecular world. Then, on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Warsaw was bombed. The university closed. The world Kasia had known disappeared in a matter of weeks. By October, Poland had been defeated, divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. Warsaw fell under German occupation. The Nazis immediately began targeting Polish intellectuals, professionals, anyone who might lead resistance. They wanted to destroy Polish culture, reduce the population to laborers serving the German Reich. In November 1940, Kasia's father was arrested during a roundup of Polish professionals. The Germans were systematically eliminating pharmacists, doctors, teachers, lawyers, anyone with education or influence. Tomasz Nowak was sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. He never returned. Kasia and her mother received notification of his death in February 1941. No details, no explanation, Just a brief notice that he died in the camp. Kasia's mother, Anna, was devastated, but she didn't collapse. She started helping the Jewish families who were being forced into the Warsaw Ghetto, smuggling food and medicine across the walls, risking her life to help people the Nazis had marked for extermination. In August 1941, a typhus epidemic swept through the ghetto. Anna continued her smuggling operations, bringing medicine to families who had no access to health care. She contracted typhus. She died on September 12, 1941, at age 46. Kasia was 23 years old. In less than 2 years, she'd lost her father to a concentration camp and her mother to a disease she contracted while helping others. She had no siblings, no close relatives. She was alone in an occupied city, with no future, no hope, and a rage that burned so hot she could barely breathe. In October 1941, Kasia made contact with the Polish Home Army, the Army of Krajowa, the largest resistance movement in occupied Europe. She told them she wanted to fight. They asked what skills she had. She said, "I'm a chemistry student. I know how to work with chemicals, how they react, how they combine. I can build things." The recruiter looked at her carefully. "What kind of things?" Kasia said, "Explosives. I can build explosives from common materials, things you can buy legally, things that won't attract attention. I can make weapons that look like ordinary objects." The recruiter was skeptical. The Home Army had engineers, demolition experts, people with military training, but they were always short on explosives. German security was tight. Military-grade explosives were nearly impossible to obtain. If this young woman could actually build functional explosive devices from household chemicals, that would be valuable, very valuable. They gave her a test. Build a small explosive device, demonstrate that it works, prove you're not wasting our time. Kasia spent 2 weeks researching, experimenting in her tiny apartment, working with chemicals she purchased from various shops around Warsaw. She studied pre-war chemistry textbooks, looking for reactions that produce heat and gas rapidly, the basic requirements for an explosion. She found what she needed: potassium chlorate, a chemical used in matches and fireworks, mixed with sugar in the right proportions, created a powerful explosive compound. It wasn't as powerful as TNT or dynamite, but it was strong enough to kill people in an enclosed space. And both ingredients were legal to purchase. Potassium chlorate could be bought at pharmacies for cleaning purposes. Sugar was rationed but available. The detonator was trickier. She needed something that would trigger the explosion on a delay, giving her time to plant the device and escape. She experimented with chemical timers, eventually developing a system using sulfuric acid, battery acid, easily obtained in a sealed glass vial. The vial was suspended above the explosive mixture by a thin copper wire. Acid vapor slowly corroded the wire. When the wire broke, the vial broke, acid contacted the potassium chlorate mixture, generated heat, triggered the explosion. By adjusting the thickness of the copper wire, she could control the delay from 30 minutes to 6 hours. She built a test device, small scale, and took it to an abandoned building on the outskirts of Warsaw. She armed it, set the timer for 30 minutes, and retreated to a safe distance. 28 minutes later, the device detonated. The explosion was powerful, loud, destructive. It worked. She returned to the Home Army recruiter with her results. She explained the chemistry, the mechanism, the timing system. The recruiter was impressed. "Can you build these devices small enough to conceal? Small enough to carry through checkpoints?" Kasia said, "I can build one that fits in a handbag. It'll look like a cosmetics case. German soldiers won't search it carefully because they think women only carry makeup and personal items. They won't look deeper." The recruiter smiled. "Then welcome to the Home Army. We have targets for you." In March 1943, Home Army intelligence identified a priority target: a German military barracks in central Warsaw housing approximately 30 soldiers. The barracks had a common room on the ground floor where soldiers gathered in the evenings to drink, play cards, and relax. Intelligence reports indicated the room was typically full between 6 and 10 p.m., with 20 to 30 soldiers present. It was a high-value target. Destroying it would kill significant numbers of German soldiers and demonstrate that the Polish resistance could strike at the heart of the occupation. The problem was access. The barracks was heavily guarded, surrounded by checkpoints, impossible to approach with obvious weapons. Any attempt to attack it directly would fail. The Home Army needed someone who could walk an explosive device past the guards, plant it inside the building, and escape before it detonated. They needed someone the Germans would dismiss as harmless. They needed Kasia. The mission briefing was held in a basement safe house. Kasia sat across from her commander, a man in his 40s who'd been fighting the Germans since the invasion. He laid out the plan. You'll build an explosive device, conceal in your handbag, and pose as a laundry delivery worker. You'll carry the device through the checkpoint, enter the barracks, plant the device in the common room, and leave. The device will detonate during the evening gathering, maximum casualties. Kasia asked, "What's the security like? How thoroughly do they search civilians?" The commander said, "They check papers, they glance at bags, but they don't search women as carefully as men. They think women are harmless. That's your advantage." Kasia nodded. "How much time do I have?" 48 hours. "We need this done before they change their security procedures." Kasia said, "I'll need to scout the location, confirm the layout, identify where to plant the device." The commander handed her a map and photographs. "This is everything we have. Study it. Plan your approach. And Kasia, if you're caught, if they search your bag and find the device, you know what to do." He handed her a small capsule. Cyanide, standard issue for resistance operatives on high-risk missions. If she was caught, she'd take the capsule rather than endure Gestapo torture and risk revealing information under interrogation. Kasia took the capsule, put it in her pocket, and said, "I won't get caught." On March 15, 1943, Kasia worked in her apartment, assembling the device. Her apartment was small, a single room with a bed, a table, a small stove, and a window overlooking a courtyard. It was all she could afford on her meager wages from occasional work. But it was private, and privacy was what she needed for this work. She laid out the components on her table. Potassium chloride she'd purchased from 3 different pharmacies over the past month, claiming she needed it for cleaning. Sugar from her ration card. Sulfuric acid drained from an old car battery she'd found in a junkyard. A glass vial. Copper wire. A metal cosmetics case. And her leather handbag with a false bottom she constructed herself. She mixed the potassium chloride and sugar in precise ratios, measuring carefully. Too much sugar, and the mixture wouldn't explode with sufficient force. Too little, and it would be unstable, potentially detonating prematurely. She'd calculated the optimal ratio through experimentation. 70% potassium chloride, 30% sugar. She mixed 200 grams of the compound, enough to create a devastating explosion in an enclosed space. She packed the explosive mixture into the metal cosmetics case, pressing it down firmly to eliminate air pockets. Then she prepared the detonator. Sulfuric acid in a sealed glass vial, suspended by a thin copper wire above the explosive mixture. The wire was 0.3 millimeters in diameter, thin enough to corrode in approximately 4 hours when exposed to acid vapor. She tested the suspension mechanism, making sure the vial would drop cleanly when the wire broke. Everything had to work perfectly. There would be no second chance. She placed the assembled device in the false bottom of her handbag, covered it with a layer of fabric, and arranged her cosmetics and personal items on top. Compact mirror, lipstick, handkerchief, comb, a small book. It looked completely ordinary. Just a woman's handbag with typical contents. Unless you removed everything and examined the bottom carefully, you'd never know there was a concealed compartment containing an explosive device. The device was ready. Now she needed to scout the target. On March 16th, Kasia walked past the barracks building, observing from a distance. It was a 4-story apartment building that had been requisitioned by the German military, converted to house soldiers stationed in Warsaw. There was a checkpoint at the main entrance, 2 guards checking papers of anyone entering. The building had multiple entrances, but all were guarded. The common room was on the ground floor, visible through windows from the street. Kasia watched for 2 hours, noting patterns. Soldiers came and went. Civilians entered occasionally, Laundry workers, cleaning staff, delivery people. The guards checked papers but didn't search thoroughly. They were bored, complacent, going through the motions. At 6 p.m., soldiers began gathering in the common room. By 6:30, the room was full, maybe 25 soldiers, drinking, playing cards, listening to a radio. This was a target window. If she could plant a device in that room and time the detonation for 6:30 p.m., she'd achieve maximum casualties. The next question was placement. Where in the room could she hide the device so it wouldn't be discovered for 4 hours? She studied the room through the windows. There was a storage cabinet against one wall, a sofa, several tables and chairs. The storage cabinet was the best option. It was against the wall, out of the way, used for storing supplies. If she could place a device inside the cabinet, behind stored items, it would be invisible. No one would find it before it detonated. The plan was set. She'd enter the building at 2 p.m., posing as a laundry worker. She'd plant the device in the storage cabinet in the common room. She'd arm it by removing the safety pin, starting the chemical timer. She'd leave the building by 2:30 p.m. The device would detonate at approximately 6:30 p.m., when the room was full of soldiers. It was a good plan. It would work, unless something went wrong. On March 17, 1943, at 1 p.m., Cassia prepared for the mission. She dressed in her modest gray coat and dark skirt, pinned her hair back, checked her forged papers identify her as a laundry worker for Frau Schmidt's laundry service. She placed the explosive device in her handbag, arranged the cosmetics and personal items on top, and checked the concealment. Perfect. Invisible. She picked up a bundle of clean laundry she prepared as part of her cover story. Then she armed the device. She removed the safety pin that had kept the glass vial sealed away from acid vapor. Now the copper wire was exposed to the vapor. The corrosion had begun. The countdown had started. In approximately 4 hours, the wire would break. The vial would drop. The acid would contact the explosive mixture, and the device would detonate. There was no way to stop it now. No way to disarm it. The only option was to plant it and get away. Cassia took a deep breath, picked up her handbag and the laundry bundle, and left her apartment. She walked through Warsaw streets, past German patrols, past checkpoints, toward the barracks. Every step brought her closer to the moment of maximum danger. If she was stopped, if they searched her bag thoroughly, if they found the device, she was dead. She kept her face calm, her pace steady, just another civilian going about her business. At 1:30 p.m., she reached the barracks checkpoint. 2 German soldiers stood at the entrance. One of them held up his hand. "Halt! Papers!" Cassia stopped, set down the laundry bundle, pulled out her forged papers. The soldier examined them with bored contempt. "Laundry worker, what's your business here?" Cassia kept her voice steady, subservient. "Delivering clean laundry, sir, for the officers' quarters." The soldier handed back her papers. "Open your bag." This was it. This was the moment. Cassia opened her handbag, held it out for inspection. The soldier glanced inside, saw the compact mirror, the lipstick, the handkerchief, the book, women's things. Trivial, unimportant. He didn't search deeper. He didn't check for a false bottom. He saw what he expected to see, and he stopped looking. "Go ahead. Deliver your laundry and leave quickly." Cassia closed her bag, picked up the laundry bundle, and walked past the checkpoint. She was inside. The device was inside. The countdown was running. At 1:45 p.m., Cassia walked through the barracks building, carrying the laundry bundle and her handbag. She passed the common room on the ground floor. 3 German soldiers were inside, sitting at a table, playing cards, drinking beer. She couldn't plant the device while they were there. They'd see her. She needed the room to be empty. She continued to the second floor, delivered the laundry bundle to the supply room, then returned to the stairwell and waited, watching the common room from a position where she could see, but not be easily noticed. Time was passing. The device would detonate in approximately 3 hours and 45 minutes. She needed to plant it soon. At 2:10 p.m., the 3 soldiers in the common room stood up, grabbed their coats, and walked out of the building, probably going outside for a smoke break. The room was empty. This was her chance. Kasia walked quickly down the stairs into the common room. She looked around, confirming she was alone. The storage cabinet was against the far wall, exactly where she'd seen it through the window. She crossed the room, opened the cabinet. Inside were stored supplies, cleaning materials, spare blankets, boxes of miscellaneous items. She moved some boxes aside, creating a space in the back of the cabinet. Then she took her handbag, opened it, removed the false bottom panel, and lifted out the metal cosmetics case containing the explosive device. She placed it in the back of the cabinet, behind the boxes, completely hidden from view. Unless someone removed everything from the cabinet and searched thoroughly, they'd never find it. The device was planted. The timer was running. Approximately 3 hours and 30 minutes until detonation. Kasia closed the cabinet, picked up her now empty handbag, and walked toward the exit. At 2:15 p.m., Kasia was walking down the hallway toward the building exit when a German officer stepped out of a side room directly in front of her. He was a captain mid-30s, with the sharp eyes of someone who actually paid attention. He looked at Kasia, frowned. What are you doing here?" Kasia kept her voice calm, showed her forged papers. "Delivering clean laundry, sir. I work for Frau Schmidt's laundry service." The officer examined her papers, then looked at her face, studying her. "I don't recognize you. Who authorized you to be here?" Kasia maintained her calm, subservient demeanor. "We deliver here every week, sir. I'm covering for the regular girl. She's sick today." The officer called down the hallway to a sergeant. "Do we use Frau Schmidt's laundry service?" The sergeant confirmed. "Yes, sir. They deliver every Wednesday." The officer looked back at Kasia. "Where's the regular delivery person?" Kasia said, "She has influenza, sir. I'm covering her route today. I'll be gone in a moment." The officer stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Kasia could feel the cyanide capsule in her pocket. If he detained her, if he searched the building, if he found the device, she'd take the capsule before they could arrest her. The officer made his decision. He waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. Leave. And don't come back unless you're on the authorized personnel list." Kasia nodded, walked past him, down the hallway, through the checkpoint, out of the building. She was out. She was safe. The device was planted, armed, counting down. Now she just needed to get far away. At 2:30 p.m., Kasia was 6 blocks away from the barracks, walking at a normal pace, not hurrying, not drawing attention. She found a small cafe, went inside, ordered tea, and sat by the window. She needed to wait. She needed to be somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses when the device detonated. An alibi, in case the Germans investigated and somehow connected her to the attack. She sipped her tea, watched the clock on the cafe wall. 2:45, 3 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock. The device should detonate around 6:30 p.m., during the evening gathering when the common room would be full of soldiers. She'd calculated the timer for 4 hours from arming. She'd armed it at 1:30 p.m. That meant detonation at approximately 5:30 p.m. Wait, she recalculated. 1:30 plus 4 hours was 5:30, not 6:30. The device would detonate at 5:30 p.m., not 6:30. That was earlier than the peak gathering time. There might be fewer soldiers in the room, but it was too late to change anything. The device was armed. The timer was running. There was no way to adjust it. She'd have to accept whatever casualties resulted. 5 o'clock, 5:15, 5:25. Kasia watched the clock, counting down the seconds. Around her, other cafe patrons talked, drank coffee, tried to maintain some semblance of normal life in an occupied city. 5:28, 5:29, 5:30, nothing. 5:31, 5:32. At 5:32 p.m., Kasia heard the explosion. It was distant but unmistakable, a deep, powerful boom that rattled the cafe windows and made everyone inside freeze. People looked toward the sound, confused, frightened. Someone said, "What was that?" Another bombing. Someone else, "No, it came from inside the city, not from the air." Kasia finished her tea, placed coins on the table, and stood up. She walked calmly to the door, just another civilian reacting to an explosion in a city where explosions had become almost routine. Outside, she could see smoke rising in the distance in the direction of the barracks. The device had detonated. It had worked. She walked back to her apartment, taking an indirect route, making sure she wasn't followed. Once inside, she locked the door, sat on her bed, and allowed herself to shake. The adrenaline, the fear, the tension of the past 4 hours hit her all at once. She'd done it. She'd walked an explosive device through a German checkpoint, planted it in a military barracks, and escaped before it detonated. She'd struck back against the occupation that had killed her parents. She'd proven that the resistance could hit the Germans anywhere, anytime. And she'd done it by being exactly what they thought she was, just a woman with a purse. On March 18, 1943, the German authorities in Warsaw investigated the explosion at the barracks. The damage was extensive. The common room had been destroyed, the building structurally compromised. The casualty count was devastating. 22 German soldiers killed, 8 wounded. The explosion had occurred at 5:32 p.m., when approximately 30 soldiers were in the common room. Some had been killed instantly by the blast. Others had died from shrapnel, from collapsing debris, from burns. The Gestapo launched an immediate investigation. What had caused the explosion? Was it sabotage? Was it an accident? They searched the rubble, looking for evidence. They found chemical residue, potassium chlorate, sulfuric acid, traces of sugar. It wasn't TNT. It wasn't dynamite. It wasn't any military explosive they recognized. Some investigators theorized it was a gas leak or an accidental chemical reaction. Others insisted it was sabotage, a homemade explosive device built by the Polish resistance. But they had no suspects, no witnesses, no evidence pointing to any specific person. The device had been completely destroyed in the explosion, leaving almost no forensic evidence. The German response was brutal and predictable. Nazi policy in occupied territories was collective punishment. For every German soldier killed by resistance action, 10 civilians would be executed in retaliation. 22 soldiers had been killed. That meant 220 civilians should be executed. The local German commander reduced the number to 50, claiming he was being merciful. On March 20th, 1943, 50 Polish civilians were rounded up at random from the streets of Warsaw. They were taken to a public square, lined up against a wall, and shot by firing squad. Their bodies were left in the square for 3 days as a warning. Kasia learned about the reprisal executions from other resistance members. 50 people. 50 innocent civilians who had nothing to do with the attack, who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who'd been murdered because she'd killed 22 German soldiers. She felt physically sick. She'd known reprisals were possible. She'd known the Germans used collective punishment. But knowing it intellectually and seeing the actual names, the actual faces of the people who'd been killed because of her action, that was different. That was unbearable. She met with her home army commander in the basement safe house. She said, 50 people, they killed 50 people because of what I did. The commander looked at her with tired, sad eyes. Yes, they did. And they would have killed 50 people next week for some other reason, or the week after that. The Germans murder our people constantly. They don't need a reason. They do it to terrorize us, to break our will to resist. If we stop fighting because they murder innocents in retaliation, then they win. That's exactly what they want. They want us paralyzed by guilt, too afraid to act, surrendering without a fight while they destroy our country and exterminate our people. Kasia said, but those 50 people are dead because of me. The commander said, those 50 people are dead because of the Germans. You didn't kill them. The Germans killed them. And the 22 soldiers you killed would have murdered Polish civilians themselves. They were part of an occupying army that's killed hundreds of thousands of our people. You struck back. You fought. That's not something to feel guilty about. The guilt belongs to them, not to you. Kasia wanted to believe that. She wanted to accept that the reprisal deaths weren't her fault, that the moral responsibility belonged to the Germans who'd pulled the triggers. But the guilt stayed with her anyway. It would stay with her for the rest of her life. Every time she closed her eyes, She saw the names of those 50 people. But she also knew the commander was right. If the resistance stopped fighting because of reprisals, Poland would disappear. The Germans would win, and her parents would have died for nothing. So she made a decision. She would continue fighting. She would carry the guilt, and she would make every attack count. Make sure that the cost the Germans paid was worth the price her people suffered. She would build more devices. She would strike more targets. And she would make the occupation as expensive, as painful, as costly for the Germans as she possibly could, because that was the only way to win. That was the only way to honor the dead. Over the next 17 months, from March 1943 to August 1944, Kasia built and planted 7 more explosive devices. Each one was concealed in her handbag, walked through German checkpoints, planted in target locations, and detonated on a chemical timer. The targets were carefully selected by Home Army intelligence. German barracks, supply depots, officer quarters, administrative buildings. Places where the explosions would kill German soldiers and destroy military assets, not harm Polish civilians. The method was always the same. Kasia would build a device in her apartment, using potassium chloride and sugar for the explosive, sulfuric acid, and copper wire for timer. She'd conceal it in her handbag, beneath cosmetics and personal items. She'd create a cover story: laundry worker, cleaning staff, delivery person. She'd walk through checkpoints, relying on German soldiers' dismissal of women as harmless and unimportant. She'd plant the device, arm the timer, and escape before detonation. 6 of the 7 devices detonated successfully. The casualty estimates varied, but Home Army intelligence calculated that Kasia's devices killed approximately 60 German soldiers and wounded dozens more over those 17 months. She became known within the resistance as the purse bomber, the woman who could walk explosives past any checkpoint because the Germans never searched women's purses carefully. The 7th device, planted in July 1944, was discovered before it detonated. A German soldier opened a storage locker in an officer's quarters and found a metal cosmetics case hidden inside. He recognized it as suspicious, called for a bomb disposal expert, and the device was carefully disarmed. The Gestapo analyzed the device, realized it was a homemade explosive using common chemicals, and understood that someone had been building these devices and planting them in German facilities for over a year. They launched an intensive investigation, searching for the purse bomber. They knew it was likely a woman, based on the concealment method. They knew she had chemistry knowledge, based on the sophistication of the devices. But they didn't know her identity. They didn't know where she lived. They didn't know how to find her. Kasia went into hiding, staying with different resistance-safe houses, avoiding her apartment, waiting for the investigation to cool down. She couldn't build devices anymore. The risk was too high. But she could still contribute to the resistance in other ways. On August 1st, 1944, the Warsaw Uprising began. The Polish Home Army launched a full-scale rebellion against the German occupation, attempting to liberate Warsaw before Soviet forces arrived from the east. It was a desperate gamble, a last attempt to secure Polish independence before the Soviets imposed their own occupation. Kasia joined the uprising, using her chemistry knowledge to build explosives for resistance fighters. She taught others how to make improvised weapons from household chemicals, how to build grenades and mines from scavenged materials. The uprising lasted 63 days, from August 1st to October 2nd, 1944. It was brutal, devastating, heroic, and ultimately doomed. The Soviets stopped their advance on the outskirts of Warsaw, waiting for Germans to crush the uprising before moving in. The Germans brought in reinforcements, heavy artillery, aircraft. They systematically destroyed the city, block by block, killing an estimated 200,000 Polish civilians and resistance fighters. On October 2nd, the surviving resistance forces surrendered. Kasia escaped Warsaw before the final German assault, fleeing east with other resistance members, hoping to reach Soviet lines in safety. In January 1945, Soviet forces finally entered Warsaw, driving out the remaining German forces. The war in Poland was over, but liberation didn't mean freedom. The Soviets occupied Poland, installing a communist government, and immediately began targeting Polish Home Army members. The Soviets saw the Home Army as a threat, as potential opposition to communist rule. Thousands of Home Army veterans were arrested, accused of being fascist collaborators or anti-Soviet elements. Kasia was arrested in March 1945, 3 months after the war ended. She was interrogated by Soviet security services, accused of anti-Soviet activities, and sentenced to 5 years in a labor camp. She spent 3 years in Soviet prison camps in Siberia, from 1945 to 1948, enduring brutal conditions, forced labor, and constant surveillance. She was released in 1948, part of a general amnesty, and returned to Poland. She found a country that had been liberated but was now under Soviet control, where speaking about Home Army service could get you arrested again, where the heroes of the resistance were treated as criminals by the new government. Kasia lived quietly for the next 40 years. She found work as a chemistry teacher at a secondary school in Warsaw, teaching the same subject she'd once used to build weapons. She never married. She never had children. She lived alone in a small apartment, teaching during the day, reading at night, carrying her memories and her guilt in silence. Under communist rule, Home Army veterans were persecuted, their service dismissed or condemned. Kasia never spoke publicly about her resistance work. She never told her students that their quiet chemistry teacher had once built explosive devices and walked them through German checkpoints in her purse. She never told anyone about the 22 soldiers she'd killed in that first attack, or the 60 more who died from her devices over the following months. She carried those secrets alone for 40 years, because speaking about them could mean arrest, imprisonment, or worse. In 1989, communist rule in Poland collapsed. The Soviet Union withdrew. Poland became independent again, truly independent for the first time since 1939. And suddenly, Home Army veterans could tell their stories. The heroes who'd been silenced for 40 years could finally speak. Historians began researching the resistance, interviewing survivors, documenting operations that had been hidden for decades. In 1991, a historian researching Polish resistance operations contacted Kasia, now 73 years old. He'd found references in German military records to a series of explosions in Warsaw between 1943 and 1944, caused by homemade chemical explosives, suspected to be the work of a single operative. He'd found Home Army documents referring to the Purse Bomber. He'd traced the connections and found Kasia's name. He asked if she'd be willing to be interviewed to tell her story. Kasia hesitated. She'd kept silent for so long. But she was 73 years old. Most of her fellow resistance members were dead. If she didn't tell her story now, it would die with her. She agreed to the interview. She told the historian everything. How she built explosive devices from potassium chlorate and sugar. How she concealed them in her handbag beneath cosmetics and personal items. How she walked through German checkpoints, relying on soldiers' dismissal of women as harmless. How she planted devices in barracks, supply depots, officer quarters. How she killed approximately 60 German soldiers over 17 months. How she lived with the guilt of the reprisal executions, the 50 civilians murdered because of her first attack. How she'd survived the Warsaw Uprising, Soviet imprisonment, and 40 years of silence under communist rule. The historian published her story in 1992. It was picked up by newspapers, by television, by historians across Poland. Kasia became famous, recognized as one of the heroes of the Polish resistance. In 1993, she was awarded Poland's highest military decoration, the Virtuti Militari, for extraordinary heroism in combat. She was invited to speak at schools, at universities, at memorial ceremonies. She was interviewed by journalists from around the world. One journalist asked her, "How did you have the courage to walk through German checkpoints carrying explosives? Weren't you terrified?" Kasia thought for a moment, then said, "It wasn't courage, it was rage. The Germans killed my father in Auschwitz. They killed my mother with typhus. She contracted helping others. They destroyed my country, my education, my future. The explosives in my purse were the only way I could fight back. And yes, I was terrified. Every time I approached a checkpoint, I thought I was going to die, but I was more afraid of doing nothing, of surrendering, of letting them win without a fight. So I walked through those checkpoints with a bomb in my purse, and I smiled at the soldiers who searched my bag, and I let them dismiss me as just another harmless Polish girl. That dismissal was their fatal mistake. The journalist asked, "Do you regret the civilian reprisals? The innocent people executed because of your attacks." Kaja's face showed deep pain. Every day, every single day for the past 50 years, I see their faces. I know their names. I carry that guilt with me always. But I also know that if I hadn't fought, if none of us had fought, Poland would have disappeared. The Germans would have exterminated us, erased our culture, turned our country into a German colony. Sometimes the cost of resistance is unbearable, but the cost of surrender is worse. Those 50 people who died in reprisal, I honor their memory by making sure their deaths weren't meaningless. We fought, we resisted, and we won. Poland survived. That's what their sacrifice bought. Katarzyna Nowak died on April 8, 1995, at age 76, from heart failure. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, fellow resistance veterans, students she'd taught, historians, government officials, ordinary citizens who wanted to honor a hero. She was buried with full military honors, her coffin draped with the Polish flag, carried by soldiers who saluted a woman who'd fought with chemistry and courage instead of guns. At the funeral, one of her former students gave a eulogy. He said, "I was taught chemistry by Pani Nowak for 3 years in the 1970s. She was a quiet teacher, patient, thorough, kind. She taught us about chemical reactions, about how substances combine and transform. I had no idea that she'd once used that knowledge to build weapons, to fight an occupying army, to kill enemy soldiers with devices she carried in her purse. I had no idea that the quiet woman teaching us about molecules had been one of the most dangerous resistance operatives in Warsaw. She never told us. She never boasted. She just taught chemistry and lived quietly. But now we know her story. And we understand that heroism doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like a young woman with a handbag, walking through a checkpoint, dismissed as harmless, carrying a weapon that would kill 22 enemy soldiers. Sometimes it looks like a teacher who carries guilt and memories in silence for 40 years. Sometimes it looks like someone who does what needs to be done, pays the cost, and lives with the consequences. Pani Nowak was a hero, and we will remember her. Today, there's a memorial in Warsaw honoring the Polish Home Army and the resistance fighters who fought against Nazi occupation. Among the names carved into the stone is Katarzyna Nowak, chemistry student, resistance operative, the purse bomber, who killed 60 German soldiers with homemade explosives concealed in her handbag. There's a plaque that includes a quote from her 1991 interview. "They dismissed me as just a Polish girl with just a purse. They thought women carried lipstick and mirrors, not weapons. That dismissal killed 60 of them, because a purse can carry more than cosmetics. A woman can be more than what you assume. And underestimating people based on their gender is a fatal mistake. I was a chemistry student with a handbag, and I was more dangerous than they ever imagined." Every year on March 17th, the anniversary of her first attack, a small ceremony is held at that memorial. Fewer people attend each year as the generation that lived through the war passes away. But some still come, some still remember, and they tell the story of Katarzyna Nowak, the woman who turned chemistry into a weapon, who walked explosives through enemy checkpoints in her purse, who struck back against an occupation that had taken everything from her. They tell the story because it matters, because it reminds us that resistance takes many forms, that weapons can be built from knowledge and household chemicals, that being dismissed as harmless can be a tactical advantage, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to surrender. Kasia was just a chemistry student, just a woman with a purse, just an ordinary person living under occupation. But she refused to accept that just meant powerless. She refused to accept that being dismissed meant being defeated. She built weapons from chemicals. She walked them past enemy soldiers who thought she was harmless. And she proved that the people you underestimate are often the most dangerous because they're listening. They're learning. They're building. And they're fighting back. One homemade explosive at a time. One checkpoint at a time. One dismissed woman at a time. Until the occupation ends and freedom returns. That's the lesson of Katarzyna Nowak. That's the lesson of every resistance fighter who ever turned ordinary objects into weapons, who ever used the enemy's assumptions against them, who ever refused to surrender even when surrender seemed like the only option. You're never powerless. You're never helpless. And you're never just anything. You're a person with knowledge, with courage, with the ability to fight back, even if all you have is a purse and some chemistry knowledge. Sometimes that's enough to change history.